Hi, we're the Heart Collective based in Los Angeles, California, streaming through the universe, and I'm Taryn.
I'm Rhoda.
I'm Liz B. We are reframing definitions through heart-centered conversations. Compassion, by definition, is the sympathetic consciousness of others' distress with a desire to alleviate it. What is compassion for us? We are suffering with each other with all the pricks in the ground right now.
Yes.
I feel your pain. And the stick sticks up your butt cheek.
Uncomfortable here.
It's a good analogy for what's going on right now, though. I think we're all collectively suffering in some way and having to have compassion and witness. Even if it's not in a visual way, I think that energetically, a lot of what's going on right now is a lot of people are feeling it. Like a lot of people have said, and I know I personally have felt it, there's a lot of chaotic, kind of intense energy recently. And so I think that we're forced to kind of have compassion for the collective, knowing that we're all at some level and people in different ways, but feeling things or going through things or having an experience that may be uncomfortable right now.
Thank you for that reminder that to a certain extent everybody's feeling uncomfortable, right? And there's no way to really quantify the level that you feel versus the level that someone else feels. But finding this common ground of just a discomfort, right?
Yeah, and a feeling that not only is it uncomfortable for your brother or sister in a collective sense, for other beings around us, but really stepping into how that feels, not just empathize with them, but needing to go into it deeper and having a sense of need to have an action to protect, to speak for, to allow more expansion for awareness for other people, to recognize that person or a group of people are suffering.
Exactly, and having compassion, even though we may not be able to empathize and maybe understand their perspective. Some of us are going through battles with what's happening politically or financially in the world. Others it's on a spiritual or energetic front or an emotional front, or it can be relationships. I think a lot of people, or most people, are feeling discomfort now, as we said, and having compassion for that, even if we don't understand it or personally can relate to it, to be able to respond in a compassionate way, at least where we allow others to have their experience.
And then I'm going to round that back to how much are we allowing ourselves to have our own experiences, and how much are we being compassionate toward ourselves. And how much can we hold of our own experience and not numb out or avoid or bypass in order to hold the container also with that same grace for somebody else. Because it always circles back to ourselves, to me, right? How do we connecting that level of openness to ourselves? Are we befriending ourselves enough that we're able to go in certain spaces with ourselves? Therefore, we can go to other spaces with others as well.
I think that's so important right now, and it's part of our manifesto at the Heart Collective is starting with yourself. We say Earth peace is created via self peace, and so perhaps compassion is the same way. And the definition you read said nothing about compassion for ourselves; it was only the other. So is that something that's prevalent in society, allowing people that space, or it being a priority?
Right. And I'm glad that you brought up bypassing, because I think of spiritual bypassing when it comes to compassion, because a lot of spiritual work has been a lot of, we have flipped the mirror and looked at ourselves, but in doing so might not have seen the plight of others around us. And often, we look at, we're striving to purify ourselves and to gain more lightness of being, which is great, but at the same time, there's people around us that are needing help, and perhaps we first need to feed ourselves in order to get to a place where we can feed others. But we're at a time right now where we can't ignore what other people are feeling, and it's a disservice to ourselves as well, because we're learning from each other. And if we're talking about co-creating a new earth where we're co-creating, where we're in partnership with other people and we're creating something new, a new way of being and living in this new earth, then we have to be able to be compassionate and not just empathize and move along towards working on ourselves only. And yeah.
It makes me think of a friend once told me that he had lightened his load so much in life to the point where he was moving from one state to another state and he only had a suitcase. And on that trip, I don't know if on the airplane or when he got there, he then realized that he could start helping other people carry their load, because not everybody had lightened their load enough.
I love that.
And I think that that's such a cute and beautiful metaphor, right? To just the responsibility that we have as we lighten and as we circle back to certain things, and we're presented with things, but we perceive it differently or in a much smoother way. How can we also offer ourselves to others?
Yeah. It's true, and that's that's what we're all striving to do. I think that are on this path of awareness and self-actualization and of enlightenment, is to be able to be of service to others. And co-create something that allows space for everyone in a more compassionate manner. And so thinking about what that might look like, I feel like right now it's very easy to get caught in, because a lot of us are isolated, like in our own communities, our own families. We're not able to travel so freely. So having compassion for someone who has a totally different way of life or a totally different experience might look, and giving our own, whatever we're going through, as much value as theirs as well, and really not placing judgment on that as well, and being able to hold space for someone else's experience. I think we're able to better do once we do lighten our own load.
Yeah.
And with the judgment, there's just so much righteousness.
Totally.
And we forget that as we coexist, realities also coexist.
Right.
We're not having the same experiences as you mentioned. And how can you hold such a dominance of truth and not the immeasurable truth that sits in everyone's being and in the universe? I'm talking about factional truths, right? Phenomenal truth. This is what I'm seeing. A really funny example recently, it's how one can look at the same happening, let's say a rally, a march, and you can have completely different narratives of what happened,
right,
based on where you were sitting and looking. There were not a lot of people. Somebody may be in the front and look back and think there was a lot of people. And so all these realities are coexisting. How do we leave space to leave the righteousness out of the equation and just welcome somebody else reality and experiencing quote unquote truth. And that this word truth is so interchangeable, and I'm having a hard time using it because, again, I'm not talking about, like that unchangeable, untouchable by the word of phenomena. I'm talking about the things that we consider truth in the world of phenomena or in our experiences. So I just want to make that clear.
Right. Our personal truths, our personal perspectives, and that comes along with our own lenses and what we see. Yes. And I think now more than ever, when everything is in flux and does feel chaotic, and there's a multitude of experiences that each of us is not going to be able to empathize with. So having compassion, I think first and foremost, that maybe we won't understand. Maybe we will not have an understanding of someone who has an opposing point of view, or whose point of view seems not inclusive or angry or driven by hate, and still having compassion that that person may be suffering.
And most likely is suffering.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's a challenge, at least for me. It's a practice to extend compassion to those who I from my perspective, I see doing harm. And that's definitely a practice I've been working with during this time.
I agree. Yes, it is a practice, but I think it comes to, at least for me, if you do enough work on yourself, the universal truth that you come upon is that we are all connected and we're all one. So when I come back to that, it's almost a way to reset and kind of remember that although their perspective is different, there is that one truth where we are connected. And what does that mean? How can I, where can I find the similarities in such opposing viewpoints? Where can I find that universal truth within each of us?
And wouldn't it also be about recognizing that everything is a side of the same
coin
or unity?
Yeah.
And so as we face, and I feel like we are facing just so much darkness, there's such a great opportunity for the light to also shine, because you can't see the stars unless it's dark, right? And how do we recognize that apparent opposite perspective, it's also part of your own perspective,
Right.
because without that, yours wouldn't exist.
So true.
It's true. We need polarities. As much as we don't like them, maybe the juxtaposition between good and evil, or kindness and cruelty. It doesn't need to be so, in my opinion, so balanced. Perhaps more kindness and less cruelty. But you're right, that polarity does need to exist. And so looking at a lot of things currently that are going on, it's just, I think it's so important to know that perhaps we can't know everything about that person's experience, or this group of people's experience. And I think having compassion that it's okay also to not feel okay right now.
Right.
And acceptance of that.
Yeah, the allowance. I got this picture when you said face, Liz, of like a diamond. Like if we're all different faces of a diamond, or facets of a diamond, the other side might look really heavy and dense to you, but they're polishing their own side in their own way. And that might look like a completely different journey for you, and you might not understand that journey, but you allow that journey to happen so that they can polish their side and you stay on your side and just have allowance and compassion and love that they are doing their work in their own way that might not be clear to you or anyone else.
So true. So like staying in our own lanes and having awareness of that, and operating, of course, with some discretion and discernment, but having compassion at the same time that maybe we can't see what that looks like.
And that's
From
okay.
Yeah,
Other side.
allowing that.
And guides me to gratitude, because through opposing perspectives and views, sometimes it's easier to solidify or be clearer about how one feel or where we stand or where we don't stand. And so it's all serving this great unfolding. And just the gratitude for that, like thank you for allowing me to be clearer where I stand and what's really important for me, for my community, my family, my loved ones, and extend that beyond the ideas of right and wrong. And then it makes me think of a quote from Rumi, which says, beyond the idea of right and wrong, there's a valley, meet me there. And yeah.
It's beautiful.
So perhaps there's not a lot of room for judgment within compassion.
Absolutely. There's no room for judgment at all, I see, in the new earth, the new way of being. We can't move forward with having judgment as a load. It is a load that we're carrying, right? Like that's the way I see it, is you're adding more viewpoints, more filters, more you're not removing things, you're adding more when you take on the judgments.
And to clarify that we're not talking about the judgments that keep you alive and safe, but the ones that impose on others your own ideas of how they should live or all should be living or doing, etc.
Yeah.
Right. And not saying that if someone is causing harm that we don't make some sort of opinion or formulate some sort of action based upon that. But I think a lot of people are seeing right now and having to come to terms with the way other people feel that might be slightly different than them. And just it's interesting to see people have humility in their compassion and kind of put aside judgment when we're taught that that's something that no matter what, I think through our society keeps it safe. We have a judgment, us and them, and that's not a way we can create an earth that works for everyone.
Right.
So
Well said.
it's interesting. I think it's nice to see that now, that people are setting aside judgment and saying, well, maybe I don't understand your experience, but I understand that you are suffering.
Yeah. And let me hold you in a way that comforts you or eases that suffering to some degree. Or what can I do to help with that, to alleviate that in some way?
Right.
So there's an ownership and a responsibility with compassion rather than just empathizing and moving on.
Right.
And I think that the times are calling for that kind of right action. And when I say right action, it's really being so present that you know what the next step is. And I feel and believe that through everything that's been happening the past few months, we're really being given the opportunity to learn how to feel, to learn how to be present, to learn how to accept, to learn how to accommodate, to learn how to extend your own ability to experience life into someone else's experience of life. We've been confronted with shame and guilt and pressure and horror. And how can we not stunt our growth in this moment by avoiding all these things, but really dive headfirst into all of it? So through our own personal healing, we're also healing collectively and healing what's happening around us. I firmly stand and believe in that power, that we have that ability to come into such congruence with this force, this eternal seed of love, I believe, that power is able to just really bring this balance into a way of living that we can minimize and minimize and minimize the suffering that we create through our habits, our words, our beliefs, our intolerances, and just everything.
So true. Yeah, and to be able to be accountable for our own energy, no matter what we're feeling, which is, I think, from what I've experienced, a rocky road lately. But having accountability for our energies and being able to hold space not just for ourselves and those who are closest to us, but for the collective, and help transmute some of the really heavy, dense energy that's coming up, and project like love. And that's, I think that there's a lot of chaos going on right now, and to be able to process that energy, and as you were saying, like, just let things be, and let things process is so important, because it's not where we are right now, in June 2020, it's not over yet. I mean, it's just getting started, right? So, yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of fear, there's suffering, people feel unstable financially, personally, emotionally, spiritually.
Yes.
And I think the sooner we can come to terms with the fact that, yes, we are individually suffering, and yes, we are collectively suffering, and let that be okay and have compassion for it, and start to look at new ways of relating to ourselves and others that is maybe a little kinder and healthier than the way it's been set up in the past, because that is not going to work anymore.
No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm just feeling that, like, yes. Yes, and yes, and yes. Bringing forth. Let's just feel like this is the time that we hold each other, that we nurture each other, we feed each other, we hold, and we really stand in this place and space where you start making decisions for yourself that are not based on authoritative figures that are telling you what you need to do based on a certain agenda, but you really take pride and take the time to really center yourself so you can be in the world but not of the world, and really like extend your arm and reach a little further, because we can, and we are in the time that is so needed. And our ability to do that has been compromised to a certain extent by, things that are happening that are quote unquote out of our control, but we can control. I think, can open up a little more in that realm of what we can do.
I like that idea of compassion requiring, like if we're looking at a new version or a new nuance of compassion, but needing that centeredness, needing that centered place, aligned place, whatever you want to call it, because then we can have the power to give. Like, that's where our power comes from, that connection and that centeredness within us. That's going to allow us to be compassionate and not just empathize, but allow that energy to use that energy for the action that's required of us.
True. Yeah. Because we're not going to be able to empathize with most people on the planet. We're not going to be able to look at everyone and say, oh, yes, I've had that experience. Let me tell you, what it feels like. I understand. I mean, that's just not the reality of living on a planet with so many diverse people and experiences and energies and purposes and walks of life. So I think that perhaps, we have the definition here of compassion, and I think that the three of us felt it was pretty incomplete. Compassion, sympathetic pity and concern for sufferings or misfortunes of others. I think that perhaps that definition is incomplete, is the way we've been extending it to ourselves and others. And moving forward, I think the time is going to come soon where we need to decide the way we want the world we live in to look. And I think taking into account compassion for ourselves and others is going to be a requirement.
Yeah.
Compassion is courageous.
So courageous.
It takes courage to be compassionate and to extend yourself beyond your comfort zone to accommodate someone else's suffering, ideas, perceptions that are in complete opposition sometimes to yours. But you can still understand that that doesn't discredit your experience. But you can hold somebody in whatever they're going through, beyond your judgment of right and wrong, good or bad, and so on.
So true. And maybe we don't need to give our approval to give our compassion.
Yes.
So, and that goes for ourselves too. I know, just purely not from a theoretical or philosophical stance, I myself have gone through and have witnessed other people going through things where maybe you don't want to approve of the level of suffering you've been going through or the amount of attention you've had to give it. And being able to allow that, I think that's as important as removing the judgment aspect from it.
Yeah, the acceptance of the suffering that comes with being in this experience, right?
And growing. And transmuting and evolving. It is not always a smooth path, especially when there's big growth or growing pains.
Which looks like we're going through right now collectively is big,
For sure.
big growing pains.
Yeah.
Aches and stiffness and incongruences and just paradoxical things happening. But I want to grow, but this hurts. And all of it together. And how do we make the best out of the soup that we're being presented without having to rationalize it and understand, like you guys were beautifully speaking before, but just really diving into, right? Letting more than just your mind, letting your other senses guide you into this experience. We know what pain feels like. Everybody has suffered pain, emotional, physical. So we don't have to have had the same experience to understand what pain feels like and to hold somebody if they say this is painful.
So true.
I think that we're growing into a capacity to feel, to hold, to transmute that's bigger than we've had before, individually, collectively, and I think that that's the treasure that we are, like weaving and disconstructing and building, and like it's a bigger container. And we see it all, and we also know what to throw out of the container. All right, we've had enough of this. Because again, it takes courage to face certain things and just know for yourself, for others that may not know yet for themselves. Enough. Enough.
That's so true. And to be able to extend that beyond people who we may love or care about or know or be familiar with, or who act or think like us, or who hold the same beliefs as us, and even extend it beyond to other non-human beings, to animals and plants and the earth, and know that they too can experience at the level appropriate for the being that they are suffering, and that is not exclusive to us any more than it is exclusive to people who live near us, or people in general at all. And be compassionate for all beings that are on this planet, because I think that everyone is feeling it. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone that is living here.
Yeah, how can you not feel it?
Right?
I think that's what's so different about this time right now. It's like you can't not feel it.
Right?
You can ignore it, but you feel it.
So true. So true.
You can numb out, but you wouldn't numb out if you weren't feeling it. So we'll find you in there somewhere.
Yeah, it's going to get in some way in the cracks.
Somewhere.
Everyone. So compassion is definitely really key for all right now.
Yeah, and I'd like to, we ended our last, I don't know if we ended, but there was a point in our last episode that we talked about practices, right? For me, my favorite practice of compassion is blessing. So when I'm having a hard time with somebody or a situation, or, you know, opposing, like there's this energy that you feel like it's opposing you, the easiest way for me to deal with it is to bless it. And to offer it the highest regards that I can as a person, as a being. And just to let that blessing infuse and then do what it needs to do in whatever way that I have no control of. So I think that that's where neutrality would come in. It's just the not feeling drawn to a certain result, but just giving blessing. So for me, blessing is like a big practice in situations like that. And also to know how to navigate, because we've talked about it before, I believe, like there's so much pressure, right? There's pressure, stress, fiction. And I'm going to go back to my roots of yoga. That's what we're doing with our bodies, through friction, to pressure, to stress, to be able to then meet. And that external pressure, meeting your pressure, it's not necessarily a fight, but you're raising both things so they can then almost like, I don't want to say permeate each other, but then they can meet and there's not that power struggle, because one is stronger than the other and it's forcefully trying to banish or push. It's just this meeting where the intensity is similar, so you don't have nothing to push against.
Beautiful.
I love that. What came to me when you were talking about blessing was, and even compassion in general, I was thinking about what am I struggling with personally in terms of compassion. And I have this neighbor who is known to be difficult. I was told by another neighbor not to have her near my son, because she has some mental struggles, I think. And for some reason, I've ended up having text conversations with her. She had posted on Nextdoor months ago that she needed help, or she was afraid of being alone and she wanted someone to check up on her. And so I extended myself and I said, I will definitely check up on you. So every now and then we text each other like, how are you doing? And she's lonely. And at the same time, there's a part of me that doesn't, I'm very concerned with the word should. Like, I don't like to do things when I start thinking I should do something. Right. I always step back and I don't do it.
Right.
And I sit in it and I figure out what's right for me. That's the discernment part of it, I suppose. But, there's what I would like to do if I was capable of it would be to take care of someone and bring them food and whatever. But it's a strange time right now with the coronavirus thing. People want distance. So there's a strange, you're talking about opposing forces. So there's this strange kind of dance between me and this neighbor. And she's asked, do you know anyone who would like to go on walks? And I could do that, but there's also a part of me that doesn't want to extend myself. And so I was thinking, how can I resolve this? And when you were talking about blessing, Liz, I was thinking, like, speak to her higher self. Like, just get that right first, and then things will follow in the real world. Like, how can I not come from a place of guilt, but really come from a real place of giving? How can I resolve this within myself? So I think that's a personal practice that some people can do too, is like, first of all, not act out of guilt or a should, but just really feel into those feelings, and then go from a higher perspective and talk to someone, their higher selves. Let that be worked out. And then the action that is meant to come out will happen. I believe that anyway.
I like that, because
Totally.
I think you're realizing that none of us are capable of resolving everything. And some things, in order to be resolved, we need to put them in hands greater than ours. Some people believe that's God. Some people think it's the goddess, the spirit, ancestors, or from a more agnostic viewpoint, just leaving it up to fate and time to resolve things. And sometimes we just need to put, whether it's through time or God or whomever we hand things off to, just say, going into hands greater than mine. If a relationship isn't working, maybe it needs to sit for a while. If you have questions with, how to deal with an issue, maybe it needs to just... You're right. It needs to be resolved in a way where we don't have everything so heavy on us, on our backs. And it's part of compassion for ourselves.
Yeah.
Allowing things maybe to be unresolved for a moment. Especially right now.
Yes.
I mean, forget that.
Beautifully stated. Absolutely. There's no end point here, kids.
No.
There's no point that we arrive in the final destination, so we better enjoy the ride.
Yeah.
So true.
That was beautifully stated.
I like Dr. Wayne Dyer's idea about spirituality, and he says that whatever thought or action that separates us is not of God. And so even in doing something that could be helpful to someone, if it's done out of guilt or there's a separation there that you're creating, and so it's not beneficial to anyone. So it is important to take that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, especially with the example you used of someone just having to reach out to people that were potentially previous, like almost strangers, and ask if they can have some attention. It's like figuring out how to navigate that, or how to navigate going to a grocery store. Or things that previously we didn't, that weren't such loaded experiences or energetically infused experiences or charged for a lot of people. I think that compassionate is a big one right now.
So we infuse ourselves with the capacity to be compassionate and to land in the hands of a greater mystery with all of our issues and dilemmas and unresolved concerns and relationships and troubles, knowing that there is a great unfolding happening that is for us and never against us.
Beautiful. And so true.
We have a quote for compassion. I'm going to try to remember it to the best I can, by Frederick, I want to say, can't remember his last name, forgive me. But it says something along the lines of, compassion is so fatal to the knowing that there is no peace and joy for me unless there's peace and joy for you. So we'll let that marinate in the hands of the great mystery and see how that expresses itself through each and every one of us. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. We are the Heart Collective.
Thank you.
See you next time.
The Heart Collective is an initiative based in Los Angeles, California, and working globally to foster self-actualization and earth peace via self-peace through our nonprofit offerings and workshops. You can find us online at heartcollective.org, on Instagram at heart.collective, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.